Let's get nuts.
We're off. Well, Thomas, I'm a bit nervous actually talking to you because I first came across you in, I think it was 2013, about a year after you did your you did, I think, the second episode of Alchemy Radio in 2012. Do you remember that one?
No.
You better. Are you serious?
I've done thousands of interviews.
Yeah.
I can't remember, you know.
Yeah. But I suppose the information that you put out there about psychopaths at the time was, I'd say, it was the biggest mind blower for me in my life. It was quite, it kind of hit home harder than anything I'd ever learned, I think. And I suppose my own so-called awakening, if you want to call it that, started in 2010. But I think that the only thing that's really stuck with me since then is that interview that you did, and your book, Puzzling People. I ran out and got that, and myself and the wife, it changed our world actually. And I suppose, how did you, as you were a musician and an artist, graphic designer, and that, and I'm just like, was there a moment in your life where you were dealing with somebody or something just twigged, and you went down this path and discovered what psychopaths were?
Well, first of all, thank you for that. Well, you know, I don't think it wasn't a result of a traumatic experience in any way like that. I was working on Wall Street in an international finance section of a major company. I was a communications guy and a graphics guy, so I wasn't a money man. But I dealt with people there that there just something wasn't quite right with them. I can't explain it. They were very glib, superficial. I didn't feel like I could ever connect with them in any ways, but I didn't go around judging them. It's just like, well, like there's other people in the office I'm friends with, and I'll be the end of that. Not everyone gels. And at the same time, around that time, now this is about mid 90s, maybe no, before that, like early mid 90s, like 93ish. I took an interest in serial killers because I read David Yallop's book, Deliverance from Evil, where he basically profiled not only Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, but a second person that must have worked with him. And I became fascinated with how this thing worked, and criminal psychologists and, you know, this kind of psychiatrist and prison psychologists and stuff. And there wasn't an awful lot on psychopaths out there. There was People of the Lie was one book, and Hervey Cleckley, The Mask of Sanity, was another. But there really wasn't an awful lot. The best information was generally at that time what I knew about. There's no internet then, remember. Well, there wasn't really much of an internet. Was true books, profiles of serial killers, Ted Bundy, these kinds of things. And I was reading a profile. I'm just like, it was a criminal profile of a serial killer. And I was in work on my lunch break. I remember very clearly. And I'm sitting there like eating an apple, and I'm looking up, and I'm going, that's him. It was a fellow I worked with. He had all the traits of a serial killer, except he didn't kill. And I was bemused and just laughed, you know, that kind of thing. I didn't really, you know, what I remember saying to myself, he'd make a great serial killer, that kind of thing. And still quite innocent up to the fact that there was none serial killer psychopaths. I thought they were all like killers. Then Robert Hare, excuse me, Robert Hare came along, from a professor from the University of British Columbia, and he wrote a book, Without Conscience, and he had studied non-violent psychopaths, and he had put out a list of their main traits. And like you were saying, of Puzzling People, it was the same for me with that book and his work. And that was just it. I said, well, we have these psychopaths in society who don't kill people, but they destroy them in other ways by using them, manipulating them, playing games with them, exploiting them. And they're not that difficult to spot, really, once you have the information. So that was that. And then I moved back to Ireland, and I was working as an artist, and then that kind of, the economy crashed in 2008. Remember that? Yeah. And I couldn't sell a painting anywhere. All the art fairs had basically stopped. And so just to something to do, I started making YouTube videos around 2009-10 on called Labyrinth of the Psychopath, just throwing it out there. That I'd learned this stuff, and it's kind of interesting, and maybe people are interested in it too. And the videos took off, not massively at first, but they got, like yourself, people would say to me, have you any more information? And I'd give those books in their way. And there was a lot of the internet was better then. You were getting an awful lot of academic papers and this kind of thing. And then people were saying things to me like, well, you explain it in such layman language. You don't know how useful that is. That you break down the kind of the mystique of it. And then the publisher, which I'm still with today, contacted me and said, would you like to do a book on this? It's fascinating stuff. And that's how Posting People came about. And I just thought a few people would buy it, but it's been quite successful in the last 11 or so years. And yeah, I mean, like hundreds of thousands of people have probably read it now at this point, and between the internet versions and the other one. And it's as much a surprise to me as anyone else, but it was just something. Now, it wasn't my primary interest in things. I was interested in a lot of kind of esoteric subjects and occult and stuff like that. But I mean, from reading Puzzling People, I do squeeze a bit of that in there through folklore. I'm interested in things like that, and there's illustrations in there from like, the witchcraft trials and stuff like that. And I said, I'm not going to write a pure science book or a pure guide. I'm going to throw in what my own feelings about the world and reality and all that thing is. And here we are now, all these years later, and I'm still amazed when people go to the street and say, like what you just said, that book saved my life, or thanks for writing it. I mean, even other people come up to me and say, I met someone last week who knows you, and they said your work saved his life.
Yeah.
So there we go. I mean, I didn't start out to be a kind of a self-help book. It was more like a field guide, and it was more like, my attitude towards writing that book isn't this terribly interesting? But it didn't really mean as a self-help book. It just kind of became that way,
Yeah. Well, it was. I found it absolutely mind-blowing. But I suppose people have the wrong impression of what psychopaths are. I suppose, like you said, you started out and you were studying serial killers, and then you discovered that they're just walking around amongst us. So I was thinking of that. Are you familiar with the movie The Terminator?
Oh yeah.
I was thinking about that scene where Kyle Reese is trying to explain to Sarah Connors exactly what this machine is. So if you were in that situation now, how would you describe to somebody who, if their life depended on it, they really need to understand what psychopaths are? Because there's a lot of kind of soft language around it where they'll call it antisocial personality disorder, and it makes it sound like with maybe some counseling and maybe some medication that you can be cured of this, and maybe you were damaged, but perhaps maybe they're actually born this way. And I sometimes think they're like crocodiles in human bodies.
Well, I go back to Robert Hare again in Without Conscience. This is way back in the 90s. He referred to them as an intraspecies predator. Intra, I-N-T-R-A, species predator. And absolutely, that's what they are. They're born that way. It's not something that are proto-psychopathic people, but they're not true psychopaths. They may have been damaged by war, and they made them crazy, and or they had abused as children. Well, you can cure them, no problem. You can fix them because they will still, they will still have a conscience about it. Maybe years later, when I first was a young lad, went to America, I met guys who had come back from Vietnam, and they were all in the 30s by that stage. And a lot of them said the shit I did, it haunts me every night. Well, a psychopath wouldn't do that. In a war situation, he did those things, but when he got back home and he reflected on it, he realized what he did was monstrous. A psychopath would be like, well, so what? I don't care. Now, that's the whole thing. And this is kind of interesting because people, when they're targeted by a psychopath, they tend to take it very personally. Like they think like this was an evil monster who set out to rob my money or rob my life or whatever. In reality, it's just business. It's just like, they looked at someone and they said, oh, he has something I need. She has something I want right now, and let's go take it. And they do it. And what happened, it's not like people are like, how could you do this to me? If you to be honest with you, they would just say, well, don't take it personally. It's just business. It's like, you had money and I wanted to take it. you had a life, and I needed to get you out of the way. And that could be anything from minor things like robbing some of your money, swindling you in a business deal, all the way up to killing you if they can get the insurance money. But it's not driven by hatred or passions or, you know, a kind of a zeal. It's just purely like a machine, like I said, a Terminator, a machine like, you know, attitude, behavior, and response.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because when I learned all this stuff from you, I started seeing it in we'll say characters on television, and I found it kind of surreal, like you say, esoteric, in the sense that people maybe with a specialized interest would understand what they're looking at when they see this character on the television portraying psychopathic tendencies or traits, where the audience who doesn't understand what psychopaths are, they don't see this. And I'm just wondering, you know, have you noticed that yourself in film or television? I know you're not exactly a television addict, but I find it kind of surreal that they'll give characters. I remember at the time I was watching Breaking Bad, I think, and they were giving the main character, they were giving him real psychopathic traits that only a psychopath would do this. But then in the next scene or the next episode, he would show real humanity, and it kind of blurs the lines, and it makes it more difficult, and probably makes it easier actually for psychopaths to blend in our society. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's true. I think, like, I've never actually had that. I don't, like I said, I don't really watch television ever. I do like movies, and occasionally I'll see a movie that will go bang, they got it perfect. One of them was the talented Mr. Ripley. That was fantastic portrayal. That's probably the best portrayal of a psychopath ever in the history of cinema. And there was other ones like To Die For with Nicole Kidman, where that was just based on a true story. Another one, American Psycho, was very good in lots of ways, but a real psychopath wouldn't kill, because that would be, you know, too messy. You'd go to prison. You know, that's the only thing that would stop from killing someone, is going, you know, I might get caught, but nothing else. It wouldn't be like a moral thing. But otherwise, there was scenes in that film that were tremendous in terms of the accuracy, like the way he's describing music. Do you like Genesis? Do you like, and he doesn't have a passion or a love for music. Like, if I'm telling you I like, you know, this album or that album, I go, oh, you have to hear this, is great. He was like reading the review from Spin magazine or Rolling Stone or The Village Voice. You know, it was purely like, yeah, at some level he might have said that sounds nice, but there was, you know, there's no passion for the music. He wouldn't have the feeling for it. It's, you know, exactly. So it's like the cartoon almost like a superficial, and they people have said, and this is one of the reasons I got out there writing the book, the psychopaths are charming. No, they're not charming. They may be charming to naive people or people who are vulnerable, but they're actually very superficial and glib to most of us. But they do or say something that might make us see past it. And that in the film, the Patrick Bateman character, he's very glib and superficial. He's not genuinely charming. And that scene with the music was like, you know, part of it. And you know, the guy that I'm telling you about that I worked with on Wall Street, he was always trying to get me to be his friend by seeing things. He knew I was kind of interested in like a sort of like unusual art forms and stuff like that, and like kind of like conceptual art. And so he would see he'd see an article in the New York Times Saturday Review of some exhibition that might not even probably interest me in New York. And he'd come up to me and he'd say, "Have you seen this? It's like, Thomas, it's really interesting. It's like, I saw it, I thought of you. You know, I'd like to go. Would you want to go together? Maybe we can have a few beers afterwards." You know, it was totally fake, you know, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. I was going to mention that scene from American Psycho. That was the one with Christian Bale.
Yeah.
Because during the election, the last election we had, or the pre-election, I saw Simon Harris dancing with this woman, and I swear to God, I thought, Jesus Christ, this guy's a psychopath. And I sent the video to a family member, and he looked so peculiar, and that they thought it was AI. They said, no, that's not real. That's not a real person or whatever. They thought it was fake or something. But he just looked like somebody who was trying to mimic natural human behavior or something, and there was just something so fake about it.
Yeah, I wonder if that's more of an autistic thing. He seems quite autistic to me, that guy. So it could be that, like a kind of like. In fact, in Russia, they used to. I don't know if they still do, but I remember reading a research paper years ago. They used to call it pathological autism, psychopathy, pathological autism,
Right.
and so he definitely seems to have this autistic thing about him. Whether it's psychopathic, I'm not going to judge parents. I didn't see the video, but I've seen stills from it, and like you said, the try hard thing, You see, but the thing is that like a real psychopath would go and take dancing lessons before you go there.
Yeah.
Oh, he would go to a dance studio and says, "Can you teach me how to do a dance?" I mean, this is what they're like, bastards, Like, like Bill Clinton learning how to play saxophone and wear sunglasses so he could look like a cool guy on the David Letterman show. It was all bullshit.
And you think Bill Clinton is a psychopath?
Oh, absolutely, and so was his wife. I mean, I don't like judging women, but like, there's enough information. I mean, the way he could lie there and say, "I did not have sexual relationship with this woman," and then she produced her dress with his sperm on it, and he says, "Well, in the culture I come from, oral sex is not considered sex." I mean, that's a psychopath.
Yeah.
A real person just say, "You got me," and it's bullshit. And the fact that so that was like that to me was what did it for me with him. There's no way. And then, it turns out that he has this like appalling history with his wife, where like even kids have been murdered who'd stumbled upon drug deals at the airport in Arkansas. Very dark individuals. But again, superficially charming. He turns on the Christmas lights in Belfast, and they all love him.
That's it. And psychopaths, they can recognize each other. Is that right?
I don't know about that, but they don't consciously go looking for it. That kind of thing. They might not even like being around. Like there's one in the office, he might not like having another one around because it's territorial territorial pissing kind of thing. I mean, this is my scene. I'm working this one. They don't work or cluster together unless there's a necessity for it. But they don't sit around and goes, we're on the same team, let's do this. There's nothing like that. They're incredible. It's a selfishness like you couldn't imagine.
Yeah, at the end of Defeated Demons, you interviewed Larry, the psychopath, and you asked him if he could see other psychopaths, and he said yes, I see them all the time. And he described it as they have a glow about them. I thought that was a bit crazy.
But he was a piece. He was a piece of shit, that guy, and I felt sick from meeting him for a long time afterwards. And he was this was the guy I'd met in Carrick and Shannon, I think, and I'd bought him lunch. Is that guy?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I didn't feel right about that. I'm still to this day creeped out by that guy. Now, he was incredibly narcissistic. So he said the glow thing, he may have said it like, "Aren't we all wonderful?" kind of thing. But yeah, he was he was the guy. I'll never forget that. He demanded €500 off me or something.
Yeah.
Go fuck yourself. I'll buy you lunch, but you're not getting fun. He said, he said, there's a cash machine, and he wasn't even from Carrick, and he knew where the cash machine. I mean, he scoped it out earlier on, and he says, there's a cash machine up the road. You can take €500 down. He said, you're not getting a penny off me. And so it was like he was. He got a job working for a band, and even at one point as a truck driver, and traveling the world. And he was telling me that he was robbing stuff and everything. Like they wouldn't. He was a stupid one. There's different degrees of them. There's ones who are very intelligent, and there's one like it'd have like I grew up in Ballymun. I can remember like a few of them from when I was younger who were like stupid ones. That kind of thing. They were stupidly opportunistic.
Yeah. I honestly, after I reread it there the other day, and I can imagine you were drained. I was nearly drained after reading it, just imagining what it's like to be in the presence of one of these entities, really.
Yeah, but it's more like being around a piece of shit. It's not like kind of like around a demon or something like that. Okay. No, so I told him to go fuck himself when I left as well because I had to tape. So I didn't need him anymore, but I didn't want him anywhere near me ever again. And he didn't know where I lived or all that. But he wasn't like dangerous. He'd be more like kind of an asshole, that kind of thing. But it's just I would describe a rawness of him, like, he was like, look, you think of fucking hot shot, this kind of thing he was saying to me. He was insulting me a lot, and, this kind of thing. A lot, it was kind of like a rawness is the only way to describe it. There was no sense of being comfortable around this person. He never would be. He was one that just he was an ugly bastard, so he couldn't like manipulate women, and he had no redeeming talents or anything. So he was one of those types who was like, well, people think I'm a piece of shit, so I'm a piece of shit. That one of those type of psychopaths.
How would you differentiate between a narcissist and a psychopath then? Would you kind of say like that a psychopath, I know you were saying there's different levels of intelligence with them, and some kind of maybe seem to be more reptilian in kind of nature. Is that kind of how you would differentiate between a narcissist then?
Yeah, the thing is, John, was what Niall was saying there about all the grey areas. The biggest grey area of all is the DMC, I think it's called the DMS, the book of psychiatric disorders published by the American Psychiatric Society, Psychiatric Association, and they literally, everybody is nuts. Everyone in the world is mentally ill on some level according to that book, but they call psychopathy narcissistic personality disorder. Now, that's blurring the lines as far as I'm concerned. It's not an honest thing. It's like, let's call a spade a spade. And then people say, what's the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, a psychopath is, a sociopath, if you look at the list of traits, they're quite similar. But I said, okay, from what I've discovered, the psychopath is the purest form of all that. The kind of thing, like it's born that way. It's not like, you can't like say, well, he grew up in a war zone or his father molested him and he's full of anger, or he's just like there are people who are narcissistic and self-serving, but they're not psychopaths. They're just, people that just, take advantage of others, use others, but they might like not like doing it, but they might, just do it for survival. A psychopath gets a rush from doing this stuff. It gets turned on by it. That's one of the reasons they don't stop, is because they get this rush. So, I think I don't like these terms like narcissistic personality. I don't even like sociopath. I think psychopath is perfect, but the problem with psychopath is people think serial killer. They think Ted Bundy. And so they came up with the term sociopath to sort of like say it's a psychopath, but they don't kill. But they will. The thing is that a sociopath, if you might, will kill if they're a psychopath. If they have to, you have to always be aware. If they need money, they'll burn your house down and put an insurance policy on you. That kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's not because they hate you. Or I need the money. When I was in the Boy Scouts, and when I was in the Boy Scouts in Ballymun, it's funny. This is like has only happened in recent years. It's come into my mind. I was like, this is God way back in the 70s. I was only a little kid, like 10 or 11. There was a patrol leader who in one of the patrols or whatever, like whatever you have, like the guy who's like a senior scout guy, and he was very authoritarian, this kind of thing. And he used to say, I want, like an army drill sergeant in the fucking Boy Scouts, for God's sake. And you go, I want absolute silence and absolute I'm not like even looking for silence. And I said, you mean you're demanding it? Because I was kind of pissed off. But I was like, probably what I didn't like him either. And I was like, this is ruining my day. So I said, I'm like sarcastically, I said, oh, you mean you demand it? Like me, you're so stupid, you don't even know the term demand. And I was a very smart kid. And he looks at me like this. Yeah, that's it. I demand it. And he then used me. You understand? Like, it's only now at this stage of my life that I realized what he was. And how I realized what he was there was a thread on one of the, last year, there was a thread on one of the Ballymun Facebook pages. And then someone said, "Will you remember the 88 troop in St. Papan's Hall in Ballymun in the 70s?" And I said, "Oh, I was," and a few others, yeah. And they said, "Do you know the guy?" And the guy, I can't remember his name. He stole all the money that was being saved up to go to a jamboree in the Isle of Man.
Wow.
After being Mr. Perfect, he joined the Scouts because he knew they raised up like a lot of money to send us all off on jamborees in the Isle of Man or places like that. And so he just stayed in the Scouts long enough till there was like a couple of £100, which was a fair amount of money back in the mid-70s. And then did a runner with him. And now I realized, no, I get it. He was a psychopath. Now I get it.
Do you think that you were just saying there that it's kind of like I don't know what you kind of say, stigma or of psychopaths being killers, basically? Do you think that's purposely put out there to maybe take away from the fact that a lot of people in power in government are potential psychopaths, and they're trying to maybe distance themselves from that phrase or that term?
Yeah, I think so. And it's also, I think they glamorize it too. It's almost like I've seen a few movies where you have like a really cool guy as a politician or a leader of some group, and this hot chick goes like, "You're such a psychopath." And he goes like, "No." Like this kind of thing. They've tried to like, what's the word? Normalize it. About 10 years ago, a book came out by a person called M.E. Thomas called Confessions of a Sociopath. And I was watching her on Dr. Phil with a friend, and she was quoting my work verbatim. Literally paragraphs from Puzzling People. She was quoting them. And then someone noticed, have you seen her name? Me Thomas, M.E. Thomas. It is a pen name. That she'd actually studied my stuff.
It's unbelievable.
Got a publishing deal, and even the cover of the book had, the Puzzling People as the people sideways. The artwork is forward. So there you go.
And do you think she was a psychopath, or was she just a rip-off artist? Or
I think Dr. Phil says if you were a real psychopath, you wouldn't have said that. He was I like Dr. Phil. He was kind of wise to her.
Right.
But yeah, I think she was just like a chancer.
Fuck, she probably sold a few books though.
Well, yeah, she was on like Macmillan and Company, like a huge US publisher. Yeah.
Jesus. So I suppose most people, when they learn about this, they start to spot things. So they start to think back to past experiences, and they start to wonder, Jesus, was that fucker a psychopath? And start to analyze things, and they're probably going to be more clued in when they're meeting people in the future. But I wonder if suddenly you found yourself on RTE and you were allowed to speak about psychopaths to the nation, what kind of an impact would that have if the general population were actually, I suppose, properly schooled on what this is? Because suddenly you could have hundreds of thousands of people looking around at their family members or their old friends or their colleagues and realizing that they're not the same as us at all.
In 2010, I got a phone call from the producer of the Pat Kenny show. And Pat Kenny was the host of the Late Late Show at that time. And she says to me, if you do the radio show and it gets a good in numbers, we'll bring it on the Late Late. And I said, I'm not interested. And the phone just went kind of dead. And she goes, what you mean you're not interested? You're guaranteed an audience of 1 million people. And I said, well, I just did LA Talk Radio yesterday, and there was 19 million people live listening to that. So firstly, it's not that important to me, the numbers wise. And secondly, it's just not my, the Late Late Show. And she was shocked that I said no. And then I got off the phone and said to people, the reason why I didn't go on is they would have had some asshole expert there who would have just demolished me and said, where's your credentials? You didn't go to medical school. I'm not a fool that way. This is why, I have had numerous mainstream officers from all over the world, BBC, the lot, and I've turned them down every single time, and I'll never go on them in any of the subjects I cover, because I know how that game is played, and also it's not worth it. They're even if the numbers are not big, that video of you being demolished will be up there forever by some guy from the Royal College of Surgeons saying that who is this person to say this, you know? So I was very wise to them way back then. My hatred of RT had been really long built into me before then, and I knew exactly how that station works and how it serves. But yeah, so no, if I had went on there, no, they would have said there. The guy would have said, "Who are you?" On page 66, it says this. Did you compare them to which? You talk about witch trials. You said they have the family in the UAE is controlled by a demon, the jinn, in the appendix, and I'm like, so I would, you know, you would, and I say, well, no, that I'm talking about what they said is an allegory. Oh, I know, but you said, you know, well, this is not science. No, I'm not that dumb, and I'm not that naive. I wouldn't say dumb because I know good people have been trapped in those positions. I wasn't that naive because I knew exactly what they would. It would have been a setup to take me down. So the Irish people have found out anyway by stumbling across my videos and the books and other things. So, you know, the ones who want to learn, it's like any knowledge. When they're ready to find it, they will find it. When they go through an experience in their lives, they will be looking for answers, and hopefully they'll stumble across me or someone like me, and that then they find it. But, you know, also I wasn't going to put a target on me as well, talking about this, especially with, you know, politicians who might be involved. You don't know who they are or what they're involved with.
Yeah. Well, I suppose just moving on, I came across just a couple of days ago, I don't know, do you know this fella, Cesare Lombardo? He was a physician, and an Italian physician. He wrote a book called The Criminal Man in, I think it was 1886. This book just landed on my lap about 2 days ago, so I haven't read it, but I was just flicking through it, and he was talking about, basically, he'd examined the bodies, in particular the skulls of hundreds of deceased killers, murderers, rapists, and what have you. And he said that he was able to find characteristics in their skulls where he could identify what crimes they were most likely to have committed, or he could examine the skull of any man and say that he could identify what crimes they were most likely to commit. And he believed that just like psychopaths are born, he believed that some people are just born bad. Are there physical characteristics that psychopaths have that maybe normal people don't have? I think I heard you saying that they might have higher levels of testosterone. They might be physically stronger.
Yeah, psychopathic women definitely have been shown by what you call it, profiling in prisons, to have higher level of testosterone than normal women. Why that is, I don't know, but they definitely do seem to have it. And there is physics, you know, that film Monster about the serial killer that was played by, what was her name, that South African actress. She was very
Charlie.
The real murder. Have you seen the real murderer? She's like a man. So very, very manly. And that's what I say to all women who are manly are, you know, have high testosterone or psychopaths, but of course not. But they do, you know. And there was one called Joanna Dennehy, I think her name was. She was murdering fellas in Cambridge a few years ago with knives. She would pick them up on dating sites and kill them with knives. And she's like a bloke as well, you know. So it definitely seems to be a very, very good piece of research. That what's the most common trait? The eyes. They have dead eyes. They don't have soulful eyes. They just don't. There's something not behind. They don't blink a lot when they talk to you. There's nothing in there. There's no depth. You can sort of see it. There's nothing in behind those eyes. And there's a reason for this, because the optic nerves, they connect with the brainstem at the lower brainstem of the reptilior complex. And when they're in the predatory mode, the brainstem is flooded with a hormone called norepinephrine, and this excites the optic nerve and causes their eyes to go.
That's bad.
So that's like, now that's what I say again. I knew a fella, he's dead now, but he injured in a motorcycle accident. He has idolized that as well, but that was caused by the motorcycle accident. They don't be going around judging everybody. But they wouldn't have those eyes unless they're in the predator mode, like, really? You know, that kind of thing, you know?
Yes.
You know, stare and the gaze, but there's no personality behind them. There's no soul there. Even when they're not like that, there's something. But that's the thing that got me into it first when I was working on Wall Street. It was like, I remember thinking to myself, who are you? Where are you? Are you in there? Is this you, or is an actor? Like a lot. You can kind of Irish people. I think we were good at that. We had a good sense of like sussing someone out that way inherently. But yeah, like, who are you? Like, where are you? Are you in there? So the eyes is definitely one trait, and the high testosterone, the female ones. But again, we don't go around calling every woman has high testosterone, every guy with bug eyes.
We get a slap.
That was a thing I've made over and over again in my work. Don't be going around diagnosing everybody, because I used to get people write me letters back in the day saying things. Everyone I know is a psychopath. No, you're neurotic. That's what's wrong with you. You're neurotic, or else you're trying to, make up for the failures in your life by saying that they were all psychopaths rather than actually working on yourself. I dealt with that a lot in the early days.
What percentage of the population would you estimate are psychopaths?
1%.
I mean, that's a lot, though.
Well, it is. Well, you might have 10% of proto-psychopathic that have those traits, but they're not pure psychopaths. They won't be damaged by all kinds of things. I'd say 1, but when you add 1 up over 1 million people, what's that? 10,000 donors. It adds up. And one of them can literally destroy thousands of lives in the course of their life. If they live to be in their 70s, they can wreck thousands of people. So, don't just, because it's 1% doesn't mean it's 1% of damage. It might be 20, 30, 40, 50% of damage for all we know when you start looking at it.
Yeah, and I mean, they don't stop fucking with people until the day they die. Is that true?
Oh, literally, yeah, absolutely. Or they don't have a sense of their own demise. There's a scene in the gangs of New York where they're hanging a guy who's like obviously a petty psychopath type, and the character played by Tiny Day-Lewis says, "Hey, Johnny, the guy's about to be hanged." And he goes, "I'll give you $1 for that watch." And he goes, "It's my mother's watch." He goes, "Okay, $2. Yeah, okay, $2. And the guy's about to be hanged, and he sold a watch for $2. I thought it was great.
Fuck, I have to watch that again.
They'll be in the what you call the retirement home, and they'll be like, if they be looking over someone, and they've been told you've got 6 hours to live, and if someone has a €50 note in their locker, they'll steal the €50 note. But yeah.
It's unbelievable. But like, as you say, like that scene from Gangs of New York, that you picked up on that, but people who don't have a specialized interest in this subject don't. So why are these film producers slipping this information in for only those in the know? The rest of us are sitting there wondering what's going on there,
I don't know. In his case, I really don't know, but I know he probably did a lot of profiling of criminals at the time. But yeah, I mean,
he was a method actor, sure, wasn't he?
Yeah, even on death row, they'll be still like, acting like that, like, they were still trying to get one up on the guards and stuff. They don't care. They usually become born again Christians when at near the end, like Bundy, and try to make up a story that I'm like this. I killed all these girls because of pornography, but that's not a repentance thing. That's like trying to get off.
Making excuses.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, psychopaths they'll marry and they'll have families, and I remember hearing you saying once that they might pick on one child and encourage the other children to pick on that child, and even the wife will join in an attempt to sort of gain favor with the psychopathic father.
Yeah, well, I mean, the classic would be the Fred and Rosemary West. Now, I don't know if Fred West was a psychopath. I think he was more like a pathetic loser. But Rose West was the psychopath in that relationship. She was the one who was really controlling everything. And she was we don't know how many, maybe 24 people but like, he was definitely under her spell, and he was like a low-level dirtbag. There seems to be a very big S&M element to these kinds of couplings. Like, they were both into bondage and they were both into S&M, and she used to whore herself out knowingly as a madam, and this seemed to be like turn him on or put him in a submission. Very interesting stuff. But yeah, there seems to be a big S&M dynamic there. You know, there's anyone I know who ever went to an S&M club and, you know, made a joke about I burned a woman with a cigarette, they would automatically be a you know, suspect in my book. You know, they absolutely would be, as a psychopath. You know, because that's not a normal thing. You know, especially if they're trying to later on play a family man image or something. They let it slip out. They often won't drink alcohol because they don't want to tell you things. If they're drunk, they might say something they shouldn't. What they don't want you to know inappropriately.
Yes.
You know, kind of a thing. So. Yeah, I mean the couples things is fascinating. Fred and Rosemary West and you know, Maura Hindley and the other one. You know, there's a lot of that kind of thing goes on. We had that recent case in Cork where a man had murdered his wife and put her under the floorboards or something.
Yeah.
Life. Did you see him on television? It was when they were looking for a body, and they were looking, and he goes, "Oh, she's definitely in the woods." You know, he's a stupid psychopath. Like that immediately, no, they're looking in the wrong place. She's definitely in the woods. She's definitely in the woods. And that to me is like, I went, he fucking killed her. He's dead. Yeah. He did it. Because if that was your wife and she was missing, you'd say, please check the woods. Please check everywhere. Find her.
Yeah.
And he was like, and the same thing happened with the McCanns. They would laugh and mock at any evidence that was a bit, you know, well, you know, we've picked up the cadaver scent. Oh, cadaver dogs are totally unreliable. You know, this kind of thing, where a real parent would go, please find where that scent was and where it led, you know, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
We were already talking about the McCanns there recently as well. And yeah, the whole thing is nuts. Just kind of like, what was it? What's the theory? Kind of the conspiracy that they drugged the kids, was it, or something?
Is that what happened? I think you think it was an accidental overdose or something, was that right?
Yeah, the chemical babysitter.
Yeah.
You know, so they drugged them, and that's the theory. And Maddie woke up and stumbled around in his drug haze, and she fell and died from broken neck or bashing her head behind the sofa where the blood was found. And then, you know, but there was all kinds of weird things about that. One at a party, a guy called Payne, an Irish couple, that said the night before he had made a joke about that Maddie likes to do this, like the gesture for oral sex. And Jerry McCann burst out laughing, and so did the other members of what they call Team McCann. And the Irish couple were absolutely disgusted by it. You know, so there was some weird shit going on with that thing.
Yeah. And actually, you jogged my memory there. There was a woman who was found to have murdered her mother and father there in England recently. Did you see any of the footage of that?
No.
Because that was quite wild, because I think she'd killed them a few years earlier, and she buried them inside in the house. And eventually the cops came, and she kind of opened the door, and she kind of gave up. She was like, I knew you'd find me eventually. And they were like, okay, but where are they? And she said, well, Dad's upstairs in the wardrobe, and Mum's under the cupboard there or something. It was, and then she goes, do you mind if I go and get a hair go? It's just, it was, and there was one cop, I'd say he was disturbed. You couldn't see him in the footage, but you could see her, and she was like, why are you looking so worried for? You got me. You win, you know? What's the problem? And she was so fucking casual. And I thought, Christ, this chick's a psycho.
Yeah, it's just business. Business. So this is why, in some levels, I know it's a weird thing to say, but you're kind of safer if having a devious psychopath running a country than someone who's an idiot. You know, and kind of like a devious psychopath might actually listen to what you're saying if things go apart. Suppose you have a country, right? And your country is like falling apart because it's being run according to sort of the WEF, right? And it's causing huge problems in the society, this WEF policy. Well, if the leader is a psychopath, he might say, well, I want to keep my job. The people are all pissed off. So he'll turn around and say, no, I'm going to do this for Ireland now, not for the WEF. Where the kind of morons we have in politics here would just follow dogma. They just take their orders from the WEF. So you have to be kind of careful too, you know, of the ones who seem like champions. I'll do what you want. They're only just put their finger in the wind, and which way is the wind blowing, and that's why politics is a perfect position for psychopaths, because they'll just tell you what you want to believe. And if they have more power behind them, like the EU, like the ones in this country, they have the EU and the WF behind them. They don't care about the Irish people. My backup is bigger than you assholes,
Yeah. Yeah.
But like that's what I think as well. And you just kind of touched on it there as well. The politicians, like, I don't know. Look, my kind of viewpoint is, and I know a few politicians, like, but obviously you're going to like attention. You're going to love attention if you're going for a politician. But look, there's probably a lot of good people that go in there. And there's a local enough guy down the road. He's trying a lot there at the minute himself. But
yeah, no doubt about it. There's a lot of good people inside. The system is psychopathic. How can a person get through a psychopathic system? That's the problem.
Yeah.
The political system, including democracy, is designed to keep the psychopaths in power and drive the decent people out.
Yeah, yeah, but it's interesting. You see clips like doing the rounds now of Varadkar and Micheál Martin, and in America with Obama, and they're saying all the things that people would want to hear today, but 20 years ago. Things that were far right, like Obama talking about how it's not un-American to want to have a border, and Varadkar saying it's not racist to want to know who's coming into your country. Yeah, and it's like, once they're in power, they'll flip. Maybe sometimes it's the system that corrupts them, and maybe sometimes they're just playing a role to get into a position. And now when I see politicians, saying the same things that Varadkar said 20 years ago, saying them today, I'm thinking, yeah, but when you're Taoiseach in 10 years' time, what are you going to be saying? And generally it's going to be a 180 again.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I don't like democracy. I know people are shocked when they say that.
No, I'm not doing that. Yeah.
And they like, why do you hate democracy? And I says, when they're turning around and say they're defending democracy, what they're really saying is they're defending bureaucracy and civil service and all that. They're not talking about the right for people to run their country.
Yeah, yeah. When they say we're defending our democracy, they're talking about themselves, really. It's ours.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We don't want to keep you all night, Thomas, but do you still investigate Jimmy Savile? Are you still trying to figure out or prove that he might have been an accomplice to Sutcliffe, or maybe even Sutcliffe was his accomplice?
Not really, because it's kind of like accepted now. It's in the mainstream kind of anyway, that if you knew him if he wasn't with him, helping him. But I'm happy. Once it's out there and gets people thinking, that's the end for me, then I move on to something else. The Savile thing came out of reading that book I spoke at the beginning, delivers from even by David Yallop, and he said Sutcliffe definitely had an accomplice, and whoever this accomplice was had some kind of great power and was connected directly to Margaret Thatcher, because she took control of the investigation when it was at its height. So this kind of, and he spent 11 Christmases with her or something like that. Yes. And then then later on, when I found out that Irene Richardson, the prostitute, was found dead in literally Savile's backyard with 2 different sets of teeth bite marks in her, one belonging to Sutcliffe and then one belonging to another individual, I knew who exactly it was. Yeah, but that was a very interesting subject at the time, and I really, I found it fascinating. And again, it was more that to do with my serial killer thing than anything else. But no, I don't. It's done. It's out there. At the time I remember getting a huge amount of slagging when I just showed that Savile had changed his hairstyle to look like Maura Hindley in that famous mugshot. And I remember there was a debunkers board, these professional debunkers saying, there's this nutcase in Ireland who said that Savile changed his hair because he wanted to look like Maura Hindley. And they were all like slagging me off. And then like 3 years later, Louis Theroux interviews Savile, and Savile says, he says, what do you think about Maura Hindley? And Savile blatantly states it right out. I am the Maura Hindley story.
Jesus, I'll have to watch that again. I remember watching that a few years ago, but
How would you think? How do you think that Savile got away with what he did for so long?
Yeah, power, and also the same way Bill Gates gets away with it, philanthropy, a philanthropath. You know, they hide behind charity. I mean, a wonderful man. They raise money for this, that, and the other. You know, corporate charities are filled with psychopaths, filled with them. And it's a very, you know, like if the charity was real, they wouldn't be paying themselves salaries of $500,000. I mean, I have to laugh in this country when some charity needs a CEO and they say, well, his or her salary would be 400,000. Like 400,000, and they said, where are you going to get a CEO to work for under that these days? I'm like, it's a fucking charity, you know. So charities are loaded with them, as are the NGOs and stuff like that. It's an easy way to make good money without having to actually do anything except play the game.
And apparently there's a lot of them covered with that Doge Department of Government Efficiency, wasn't it, over with Elon Musk and his good buddy Donald Trump. What do you think of that thing that was happening the last few days? Do you think it's a lot of theater?
Of course, I thought it was a setup, but I do think that Elon Musk definitely has a personality issue. I don't mean he's a psychopath or anything like that, but that was very, you know, like a lot of brilliant people, they also tend to be unstable. And you know, I mean, when I was looking at that, it reminded me of a mate I knew who was a cokehead, and that's the way he turned on me. And he was, you know, and he behaved like that, and he was not. That was out of character after we'd worked together on something, and then later on he said to me, "Yeah, I was all messed up on coke. I'm really sorry about that." So I often wonder if like Musk has a drug problem, maybe that ketamine or something. I don't know, but that behavior. Like when he said that's the Epstein list, look, it's obvious Trump is not on the Epstein list, because if he was, they would have found that 8 years ago. You know what I mean? They would have found investigated him. No one's life has been gone through it. And even there was an interview back in the day with Epstein and said, no, Trump I never had anything to do with him. I just met him at a few parties, but I never was involved with him. So, I mean, that was a very immature kind of thing, but it's also something like a cokehead or someone on ketamine would actually, during a heated moment, might shout out, you know. So I think that also he probably, you know, the sales have collapsed in Europe, and particularly with Tesla, and I think like he was pissed off. So, you know, when he got out back to his regular job, it was like he realized that what it came with a price, and Trump wasn't going to give him everything he wanted. So I think it's more of a case of image. You know, these people are, at the end of the day, they're still human beings. But I think that this only made Trump look stronger when he turned around and said, "No, I'm not dealing with this carry on." You know, so at first I thought it was a game they were playing to try and get the Epstein list out to, like, you know, so all these Democrats would be on it.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking it was. I think you know, true wobbler, as the English say, you know.
Yeah.
Look, Niall has your books for the last, I don't know, was it 14, 13 years, but like, he actually has two of them here. Hold up,
Puzzling People,
Puzzling People, and what's that?
Feet of Demons.
But Niall introduced me to your work, and I started watching YouTube and things, and like the way that you delve into like the occult and things, I kind of found that very interesting as well. And it was actually funny enough, all this happens, because I was kind of looking at more of your videos the last couple of weeks, and then Niall got on to you, and then you're good enough, and thanks a million for coming on. And it was actually funny enough, it popped up in my Instagram post the other day, or feed the other day, of this ferry fort on the M18 between Crusheen and Gort. No, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but apparently the folklore is this was a ferry fort, and you can spot this in Google Maps, and it's a broken ferry fort because they built the motorway over it, and a lot of the local people were giving out at the time, and they were saying, look, why would you touch it? And a lot of them actually opposed it and stuff. And what's apparently been going on since is it's kind of like a strange area where there's torrential rain, and there's been a lot of crashes near that area down through the years.
Yeah, and that's why in Iceland they have laws where you can't build roads on where the elves live. you know. So it's like they do take it seriously, people. It's real. But like that's that's where I was. See, puzzling people and that subject kind of derailed me. Because if you look at the videos I made on YouTube before that, they're me talking about esoteric stuff and the nature of reality and Fibonacci sequences and stuff like that, and how it relates to the time of your life and how you got, and then suddenly I made that one video on the Labyrinth of Psychopath. That took me over until 2015 when I got back to that stuff with the Druid Code, which is my favorite book that I've written. And then I was always very interested in ancient sites from as a kid. So the Round Towers of Ireland are a genuine mystery, and I was involved in the occult scene in New York. Well, the Discordia scene, like chaos magic and all that stuff, and that was more of a kind of the kind of Lovecraftian kind of worldview of things. Very interested in that kind of cosmic horror, and that kind of slipped me into people like Crowley and that kind of world. But yeah, so I mean, I have to say, if it wasn't for my interest in the esoteric and the occult, I probably wouldn't have been able to write Puzzling People. You know what I'm saying? It was like it was I was able to detach myself in a kind of I wasn't a Christian, so I wasn't going to write this kind of Abrahamic good versus evil, going to hell kind of thing. I was glancing through Puzzling People for the first time in a decade recently, and I was surprised how much esoteric stuff I'd actually slipped in here and there, like these little bombs. And that was like, I had a series of essays on this stuff, and they managed to make their way into it. I mean, the appendix I spoke about, the royal family of the UAE claimed that they're descendants of a jinn, this kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, that's where I've always been, where I still am. The Psychopath thing was sort of like a part-time job that kind of took over, kind of thing.
Yeah,
just pure accident, total accident. But it is like that's the universe for you, isn't it? Like it was because of the success of Puzzling People that gave me an audience to actually get the rest of my other stuff out. So it's very interesting. It was almost like there was a hidden hand at work there,
Yeah, I'm sure believer in it that things actually do happen for a reason. Sometimes you're throwing multiple things of the same scenario that you mightn't actually realize at the time until you're kind of forced to fucking take the bet, if that makes sense. I watched one of your recent videos, and there it was actually about the pyramids and that recent SARS scan that was done. Well, I think the paper was there for the last couple of years, wasn't it, or something? But have you dug any deeper into it? Like, and I remember we actually brought up in the podcast about Sahi Owas on the Joe Rogan show, and he just made a fool out of himself, I thought, anyway, and just kind of mainstream archaeology. And like, what's your kind of current belief or thought process of that? You think that there maybe still is something to that, the ancient advanced civilization theory?
Oh, absolutely. I'm totally down with that, and I have been since for many, many years ago when I stumbled across the work of Graham Hancock and Robert Bouval for the first time. Absolutely, there was a civilization before what we think is like the previous ice age, as they call it. Absolutely, the evidence is I mean, I've traveled all over the world, so I know for a fact that I've seen this stuff that can't be explained with the like conventional historical timelines. This stuff even in Ireland, that's very strange. And I think absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, Egyptology, we have to understand that those guys aren't necessarily lying to us, but they're describing pharaonic Egypt to us. They're not describing the Egypt that built the Sphinx. They're not that they're describing the later pharaonic Egypt. So I mean, there's a kind of like they're using two different languages to describe the same thing. No, absolutely, I'm totally down with the Graham Hancock stuff. Totally down with all that. And I have been for a very long time. I think it's the evidence for this stuff is overwhelming. That there was an ancient civilization that reached a sophistication of technology, and something happened and it just vanished. And you say to yourself, well, what did it leave? Well, it left stone, but it wouldn't leave much else because I mean, when I first moved here 20 years ago, there was a mini in the back, an old mini that someone had thrown in the field next door. And it's within, it's now a brown stain on the grass. I mean, even the plastic is gone. and that's what, in 20 years. Some what would 5,000 years do to even plastics don't last. We know that. You know, where all the, I mean, there must have been billions of Coke bottles made when Coke was sold in bottles. We should be digging them all the time up in our backyard, but we never do. We never, you know, you go to your parents' house and you know when you're a little boy you lost loads of plastic soldiers in cars there.
Yeah.
You don't fall. They've all been dissolved. You know, this nonsense they told us when we were a kid that plastics last 20,000 years. They don't. They last 20 years and they melt. There's even insects that eat plastics, we now know. So it's very, you know, we would vanish very quickly if there was a, you know, that kind of an asteroid flew over, an EMP from the sun and shut down their technology. You know, you know, it's like Ireland. Ireland would be covered in forest in no time, all the roads, everything, right? And that would be 20, 30, 40 years, right? And then the tallest buildings you have in the towns and cities around the country, they all fall down because the drainage and everything else and condensation. And they would fall down, smash to pieces, and they become like sand in 1,000 years, 2,000 years. So what's going to be left after 11,000, 12,000 years? Nothing.
I think stone kind of vibrates at the best frequency for the Earth or something. Is that right? So it lasts the longest. Is that true?
Well, I mean, I don't really. There's all geology is a whole other thing, but the objects like this in these islands in particular. Have you ever heard those stone spheres they found in Scotland?
Yes. Yeah.
They have remarkably intricate. I made a documentary film on Beyond Room 313 channel called Atlantis, an Empire Lost and Found, and they're featured in it. And these things are, this one was found in Ireland, but most of them found in Scotland. And they're at the most intricate, incredible stonework that could only have been done with a machine like a high-powered Dremel. You couldn't have done it any other way. You know, that's one thing. And there's also in Nout in County Meath, they found what they call the mace head, which is made from a kind of a flint. And even the University of Galway said the only way this could have been made would be with like a very high-powered Dremel-like tool with a hydraulic nib. So we're surrounded all the time. They find things that don't make sense. So that's why I'm down with that. You know, I'm totally down with that theory.
Do you think over time that us as a people that we've lost our connection, I would suppose, through consciousness and through like the occult and things like that? So like there's that theory of the pyramids, the blocks. It's either aliens, well, ancient aliens. It's either aliens or people could use like telekinesis to move the blocks. Do you think maybe like sorcery and stuff like that? Maybe this is all these mythology stories, that these are all things maybe that were actually happened in our past, and it's a lost past that we've actually lost connection with today.
How do you mean? Like you said a lot of things there. What we've lost touch with exactly?
So I suppose if you want to break it down to like even sorcery and things, like you've kind of looked into that.
Well, magic has really been covered by quantum physics. You know, like quantum physics has kind of like validated the existence of magic. You know, that we live in a world that is made up of subatomic particles that don't seem to behave in the way they should, and that they're, you know, the double slit experiment where you're either looking at it, it's slit or not, or you know, it's a wave or it's not a wave particle. You know, we have things like now, you know, the physics prize in the Nobel Physics Prize 2 years ago was for quantum retrocausality, which they found out now that quantum particles can actually go back in time and change time. So we now know that time can be actually changed in the past. So, you know, there was the observer effect in the Copenhagen. So that's what magic was. And you had like the gateway process, which was undertaken by DARPA and the CIA back in the 80s. And basically the document says magic is real. It's just a technology that's outside conventional thinking, and it has to do with the quantum world, and it's definitely related to consciousness and the nervous system. So yeah, I mean, these guys know all this stuff. They use remote viewers and everything, you know. Now, maybe it's always, you know, like, you know, I'm kind of chauvinistic about it, but I do believe the whole NPC thing, that there are people who will never be able to use this. They're like robots on this earth, and it's a majority, like a large percentage of the human race. But there's other ones that, you know, I think we all have this stuff inside us, and these codes are unlocked if you want to use those kinds of terms. I mean, I've seen it. I mean, I've taken Irish Americans and people of Irish ancestry to megalithic sites around the country, and you would just every so often you see one go staring at it and realizing that like something was switched on in them, some ancient thing. Like this is like where I think they're starting to make it more difficult for us to actually go to ancient sites. They're putting fences around them and charging with and making an official guide who does the government spiel. They deliberately destroyed. I'm convinced now they destroyed Newgrange on purpose, because that had tremendous effects on people who were going there back in the 60s and 50s. And yeah, absolutely, they know this stuff, and they want to keep. I mean, you can get really conspiratorial about it and say that the vaccines were to make sure to do what Rudolf Steiner warned us about 100 years ago, that they would use the vaccine to stop the soul from working and turn us into robots. And you see, like, so I mean, yeah, they know this stuff, absolutely. They've studied it more, like the psychopath stuff. They've studied it more than anyone, and they're using it to stay in power.
So you mentioned there about remote viewing as well, and look, I suppose from an outsider that doesn't know nothing about it, like I'd be kind of thinking consciousness and all that. But you think it's kind of maybe down to, I suppose, a quantum level kind of a thing, so as well?
Yeah, I think the nervous system. What magic? Like in my book Sorcery, how I envision the magical process is, you have the conscious intent. You want to make a change in the material world. Then you perform an action to do it. So you may write down, I am going to do this year. I am going to make this happen. I have made this happen. You write in the past tense, I did this, right? So that's your nervous system. It's coming out your thoughts. And then sometimes, and I bet it's happened to you guys as well. And then amazingly, it happened. It actually came to manifestation. Now, what happened was, there's an intermediate buffer that exists. It might be dark magic matter, dark energy matter. It could be the quantum world. That when the conscience pushes on it, it shunts it back, and then has the effect on the other end. So your nervous system is incredibly powerful. I mean, Jack Parson wrote some of the documents he wrote. He was convinced the nervous system was the key to it, and I agree with that as well. That it seems to be able to, if consciousness via the nervous system is able to affect reality, like so, and bring things into manifestation. And I've done it all my life, it's I mean, I can tell you magic is real, it works, but you have to work at it. It's like any other effort in life. Like all magic is something that exists in your mind brought into reality. So if you're a carpenter and you design a table in your mind and you write it down on a sheet of paper, you've written a spell out, right? You've created a magic spell. Then you build it, and have that table that existed in your brain is now what Plato called forms, now exists in the material world. That's all magic is in its basic form. Something that didn't exist in the material world, brought in the material world.
You kind of reminded me of the film The Matrix there with Neo, and he had to kind of like bend his reality to his fitting. But like you said, it didn't come straight away when he tried to do it. He had to practice at it, and it was over time.
It's like a muscle. You have to work on it, and you also have to be very careful with it. That's why Crowley called it an art and a science. It's an art in that some people are better than others, just like some people are better at singing and dancing and painting than others. It's a science, and you have to go through specific steps to make it happen.
Interesting, yeah.
So when you talk about demons as well, and like, I don't know, you'd hear people talking about DMT and the DMT realm and these different beings and stuff, and people may be thinking that there's like transdimensional beings or an actual thing. Do you think that demons are potentially like transdimensional beings, or what would be your viewpoint?
Yeah, I believe they're all basically the same thing. I go with the Jacques Vallée kind of concept that some people call them demons, others call them aliens, some just call them fairies, but they're in interdimensional consciousness. They absolutely do exist. They're in every single culture. The similarities between them in folklore are almost identical, no matter where you go. I remember like one time on mushrooms, I was at a gang of grey aliens looking down on me, and I didn't even know what grey aliens were at the time. And it wasn't until years later I was going down Fifth Avenue. This is like was on mushrooms in Ballymun. I was quite young, and I saw the grey aliens, and I said, "That's pretty cool." I saw these fellas with big eyes, and they had skin that looked like it was made out of mala. Mala is what we used to call putty.
Yeah.
They had skin like mala, and they had like and now that was like a slit, like it was cutting them all with a knife. Big fucking eyes, and they were looking down on me. And then years later, I'm walking down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. Britannia's bookshop had Whitley Strieber's Communion, the book on the alien abduction, and there was that face looking right at me that I'd seen, you know.
Jeez.
And then you look, the people describe them all like that. So yeah, they do exist.
You must have been fairly blown out of the water when you seen that.
Yeah, but I was kind of like deep in that shit anyway by then, so it was like, oh, that's pretty funny, you know.
I heard you talk about it. Well, Men in Black is kind of it's kind of like it mainstream, the story of Men in Black a lot now, kind of in the conspiracy kind of realm, if you want to call it that. But and it's kind of funny with these things, like they make it mainstream. So like Steven Spielberg with the movie Men in Black, and it's pushed out into the sphere. And like if you were to ask anyone that's not interested in any of these esoteric kind of topics, like an alternative way of thinking, if you say Men in Black, first thing you'll say, oh, the movie with Will Smith and the other lad.
Or Alien.
Yeah.
Because you know we had ancient civilizations all built by aliens. No, you know, I think the media deliberately wrecks these things. You know.
Yeah.
And have you heard of any recent kind of thing like with the Men in Black here in Ireland, like?
Yeah. Up the road in Boyle, County Roscommon, in the 1990s, a UFO crash, whatever you call it, happened in the Curlew Mountains just above Boyle. And there was a big deal at the time, and it was like a Roswell thing, almost Irish style type thing, and they closed off the road access to the mountains, and we never heard anything about it. And there were families in Boyle County, Roscommon, to this day will tell you that these fellas in black suits at the door and said, "What did you see? Don't go to the garden and tell them anymore." The classic, and they describe the same way. Odd-looking fellas who are dressed kind of like weird, and weird faces and weird voices. So that be part of the interdimensional thing as well. So it's even happened in Ireland.
Do you think they're nothing to do with the government, or well, maybe not Irish government, but we'd say like black budget kind of things? Do you think that they could like potentially be like, I don't know, transdimensional police kind of a thing? Maybe.
I know they know about it for a fact.
Yeah.
Now, it was a very famous call that we were told later on was not real. And I was listening to it live because I was living in New York at the time, and I was working evenings. I used to listen to Art Bell on Coast to Coast, which is like a paranormal show, fantastic radio.
Yes.
You can find the call online.
We listen to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, an Area 54 caller.
Yeah.
And he's like, if this guy is acting, he deserves the Oscar forever. And he says, they're not aliens, they're demons.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's true. I think like they're not. I've seen no proof of alien visitation or from space. They could be from other dimensions. Well, they are. I've seen zero evidence of bread and butter, you know, nuts and bolts spaceships from other planets visiting this Earth. There's absolutely nothing. But there's, you know, when you really get into it, there's just people's interpretations. And when they start describing the events, they're describing events exactly as they happen in fairy folklore. You know, Irish fairy folklore is filled with like alien abductions. So we call them the fairies, the she.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a recent movie I told you about this. It was a couple of years ago. Myself and the girlfriend went to see it. Could have been 2 years ago. It was based above in Galway, I think, and like that. It was about the fairies, and I think it was the daughter of, it was M. Night Shyamalan actually that directed it, I'm nearly sure. Or he'd screenplay or something. But the thing about the elves that them shape-shifting. And they were shape-shifting into like people that could have been their friends. Like there was a group of them that moved into the forest, into the hut, and they were just like shape-shifting, and they were kind of like trying to confuse each other into believing which is which kind of a thing. Is that kind of a thing, shape-shifting? Like could that potentially fairies and even do you think there'd be a lot of that happening these days, shape shifting with humans and stuff, or do you think that's a thing?
Well, there's tons of it in Irish folklore. They say that's why you should not kill out the hare. If you never shoot a hare, because you could be shooting a witch. Because there's always things the Irish just could shape hares. So and in Appalachia in America, it's like they're a weird bunch of people. They're like people who came from Ireland and Scotland who weren't even settled in here. They went to Appalachian America to have bizarre folklore, and a lot of that has to do with shape shifting. And a late friend of mine called Susan Shepherd, she was
Shit, we've lost you there, I think.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
You're back again.
Yeah, sorry.
You're back
you
again.
said your friend Susan Shepherd.
Yeah, she was an occult researcher, paranormal researcher in West Virginia of that heritage. And she was writing years ago that the Mothman and things like that were definitely fairies. So it's like, and it was the same as the Irish folklore. So it's, the work of people like Jacques Vallée and stuff like that, they've nailed it, that this is the same. Aliens and fairies are the same thing. It's something we don't fully understand, and demons as well. It's another form of consciousness that exists outside ours in another dimension, but each culture has a different name for it.
And is there a connection? I heard, it was the first time I ever heard this. When you put up a clip there, I think recently enough as well, about social workers, was it? Kind of dim black.
Phantom social worker, not fascinating, that one. That's very similar. Yeah, it's social. Well, I've had a similar experience in my life, and I'll tell you before I go. The social workers, they would knock on people's doors, to a couple, and they were kind of like stiff, like the red and black, and they say, we want to come into the house and see if our children are safe. And they would flare up, and they were all over England and Wales, and at least 2 cases in Ireland, and just bizarre. And they show a card that would be blank, and they'd all arrive in similar cars that would be that'd be out of date, like a Ford Cortina that was like in the 90s, this kind of thing. And that's a bizarre one. But I've had an experience in my life, and I think I told this in the car video once a few times. When I was living in Tallinn, and there was this kid came up to me and said to me, "Who are you? I know you. Where are you from? What's your name? Who are you?" And I wanted to punch him. He was so obnoxious. "I know you." And he was in my face like this. "I know you. Who are you? Where are you from? Where are you from? What's your name? Who are you?" And I was like, shocked. And then just by what he was like, and then the bus came along, and I went into town. That was the end of that. And then I was going to Kevin Street College, and a guy used to collect me on Wednesday nights when I was at school, night class, in Pimlico, which is in the Liberties. And a voice from behind me goes, "I know you. Where are you from?" In the same kind of thick Dublin accent. "Where are you from? What's your name? Who are you? What are you?" And I was like, it's the same person again. And I looked around, and they weren't there. And then about the early 2000s, I was walking down Liffey Street in Dublin one night after having a few beers somewhere in Temple Bar. I crossed over the Halfpenny Bridge, and there was a Brazilian shop that sold like Brazilian artwork and stuff. And I'm looking in the window, and I hear the voice behind me, "I know you. Where are you from? Who are you? Where are you from?" So there's these things are weird, we've all had these strange experiences we can't explain. But it happened to me again in Dún Laoghaire after I did an event recently. So it's like some of us have these things that follow us, like like people have sleep paralysis, like in families and stuff like that. Some of us have these strange encounters with the same person in different bodies all the time through our lives, who ask the same questions. And I think that's kind of related to the Men in Black thing too, as well.
Very interesting.
Well, Thomas, we covered a lot today. Really, really appreciate you coming on. It's funny, actually, when you were talking about imposing your will, but I first listened to you about 13 years ago, and I thought, geez, I'd love to talk to Thomas Sheridan. And then I met John there a couple of years ago, and a year ago I said, we should get Thomas Sheridan on. And I must have said it about 20 times. And then when I finally fucking picked up the phone and asked you to come along. I think you messaged me back 4 minutes later, and it's like, what the fuck? I've waited 13 years, and it took me 4 minutes to get you to respond. So I'm really grateful. I only have one more request, actually. I promised my wife that I would ask you, if we send you our copy of Puzzling People with the posters and stuff, would you sign it for her and send it back to us?
Where do you live?
I live in Limerick.
So I'm never down there. Yeah, of course. Just, make sure it's safe, Yeah, I'd send you one, except I don't keep copies at home.
No,
but, yeah, could do it.
Thank you.
Thanks a million, Thomas, and thanks again for your time, and it's been a pleasure.
Okay, lads, it was, I enjoyed myself, and if you want me on again down the road, give me a shout.
Love
That'd be brilliant. Thanks a million, Thomas.